Welcome to Stage Explorations, where we interview the theater creatives and artists from the theater world, those who perform on stage that the audience sees, and those behind the theater stage that the audience almost never sees. I am a journalist and theater fan, Buell Brown, and today's guest is...
Hi, I'm Jerry Patch, the resident dramaturg at South Coast Repertory and the adapter of Christmas Carol. Thanks for tuning in. If you want to know more about South Coast Rep or A Christmas Carol or both, stay tuned.
When did you fall in love with theater, and why did you have to be part of the theater world?
I was sort of more interested in media, I think, and I was at UC Santa Barbara. I was an athlete in high school, so I was not in school plays. I was in church plays and stuff growing up. But the major that I found was closest to what I was interested in was speech and drama at that point. And so that's what my degree was in. And I got into shows because I had to do some. And then my late wife was a star in the department, and being, eager to be her boyfriend, I decided to be in some plays as well. And she was actually very talented and played a lot of leads in the early days of South Coast Repertory. And so we got involved with the company in 1967 when I took a teaching job down in Long Beach and met David Ames, who was on the faculty there. And that's kind of how I got into it. At the time, I had been writing television and doing fairly well at it, but I really didn't like writing TV. So much of the time, whatever I wrote had very little appearance to what actually went on the air. So, we just got into this theater thing, and I've been here ever since.
When did you fall in love with playwriting, and when did it go from an interest to an obsession?
I don't have too many obsessions, I don't think. I have things I pursue. I was actually very much interested in contemporary fiction and poetry. And that's where most of my reading was back in. And when I got to South Coast, they, somewhere around 1970, I think, decided that they needed someone to function as a dramaturg, although we didn't have a name for it then. And they decided, well, Patch is as close as we got, so put him in there. And so I started reading the plays that came into SCR. And it just sort of evolved from there. The irony is I used to read 2 to 3 novels a week until I got involved with SCR. And I don't think I've read 3 novels in the, almost 50 years since. So that's been a loss, but maybe I'll get back to it at some point.
When did you hear about South Coast Repertory, and why did you want to work with SCR?
Again, my wife and I were coming down to live in Long Beach because I'd taken a job there. And we had read in the LA Times about this theater that was doing Harold Pinter and some other stuff that no one in LA had done Harold Pinter. And so I had a faculty meeting at the college where I was teaching, and I said to my department head, "Do you know anything about this company, South Coast Repertory?" And I was talking to David Ames, who was one of the 2 founders of the company. I didn't know that. And so within a week, we were down and becoming members of the company. And I should say, by the way, it is now a big thing to have professional people from the theater on college faculties. And it has to do with competition for students. During the Vietnam War, there was this huge growth in higher education. And once the draft went away, fewer people were trying to hide out in colleges and universities. And so all of a sudden, those of us who were working in the professional theater, instead of being having this antipathy toward us by the academics, they started to realize, oh my God, these are the people that will be the magnets to pull students in here. And so, Dan Sullivan is a great example of that. He teaches 16 weeks a year at the University of Illinois in their graduate program. And if he didn't do anything else, they pay him well enough that he'd be fine for that year and very comfortable. So, all of that changed. And David Ems taught, I think, for 17 years until he could, he decided he would just have his living come from South Coast Repertory. I lasted even longer than that. So at one point I had 3 jobs. I was the dramaturg at South Coast, I was teaching, and I was the artistic director of the theater program at Sundance, Robert Redford's community. So that was busy.
What does the theater dramaturg do, and why is it important for the playwright and the production?
Essentially, this evolved when we had moved into the 4-step theater at South Coast, and David and Martin were trying to assess how South Coast could become a national figure in the American pantheon, if you will, or American regional theater. And we decided we would try to do it through new plays, producing new plays. And so that put me in the position of going out and finding the writers and to working with them. And what I discovered, along with my longtime colleague, John Bloor, who also began to share it about the 4th or 5th year we were doing it, was that you have to be of a particular mindset to work with playwrights. First off, it's their play, it's not yours. Second, you need to understand what it is they're trying to write. And third, as you're getting that understanding, you need to get them to trust you and to understand that you're on their side, not on the theater's side, and that you're going to represent them. And then you become a wall that they bounce off of, ideas and whatnot. And I always thought my function was especially to help a writer think of something that she or he would not have thought of otherwise had we not had that conversation. It's not like I come up with answers. Sometimes you'll make suggestions toward an answer, but almost always the playwright will come up with a better solution than the one you suggested. So particularly if you're working with good writers, and we were very fortunate to work with a whole bunch of good writers. So I think that is what you do in the development stage leading up to production. And then once you start in rehearsal, you are prominent, if you're doing your job, for the first few days, generally when you're around the table doing table work for 2 or 3 days. But once you get the actors get up on your feet, they're on their feet, the director is running the rehearsal and was for the first 3 days too, but you had a lot more to say. And now you begin to become part of the audience as well. You're still talking with the writer about maybe what's working and what might not be working as well as one hoped or one intended. But the further you get into rehearsal, the more you take on the position of an audience member and reacting as you anticipate audiences will. So, and then you feed that back to the director and the playwright. But essentially, the bulk of your work, if you've done it right, should be over with 3 days into rehearsal as far as having an effect on the text. And if you're still fixing the text, the first week of previews or something, you're able to do that to an extent in New York where you have 3 weeks of previews. And of course, I was the last 12 years at Manhattan Theater Club, and it's such a different circumstance. Dan Sullivan, the director, who's worked a lot at South Coast too, and is one of the leading directors in New York, or he says, you stage the play in the room, in the rehearsal room, and you direct the play in previews. And that's where the notes are given. Well, you can't do that in regional theater because you have anywhere from 3 to 5 previews and you're on. And really, you can't make any changes after the 3rd preview if you get 5. Because it's not fair to the actors. You have to let them settle into what you've got. So I hope I'm being responsive, in terms of dramaturgy as a process, but that's how it's, in broad strokes, how it seemed to me.
When you were first asked to adapt Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol for SER, what was your first thought about doing this task?
Well, I've been asked about, adapting A Christmas Carol, and the most honest answer I could give is a gorilla could adapt that story. It's such a good story. It's almost impossible to screw it up. But David and Martin decided that they, wanted to have a production of A Christmas Carol because there wasn't one in Orange County. And so I was asked to do an adaptation of it. And, I'd read my Dickens and whatnot. And I came up with a draft one summer. Essentially, it was I was living in Huntington Beach, about 400 yards from the beach, and I would get up at 5 a.m. before my kids got up, and sit down and try to put myself in foggy London, and at Christmas time, and write it there. And it actually was fairly easy because, as these things go, Dickens has given you everything. You don't really need anything other than what he's got in the story. So now it's a matter of what are the lines going to be? What are the characters going to say to one another? How is it going to evolve? But the redemption of Scrooge is the action of the play, and you just, go through with that. So, and then having written a draft of it, I spent literally years with John David Keller, the director, and Hal Landon, who was playing Scrooge, talking it through, talking it over, and we would refine it. I mean, I don't think we ever did the same script twice. We made changes. There were certain scenes that we changed every year until we felt like, okay, this is as close as we're going to get, that kind of a thing. But you never want to sit, and go, we're done on any kind of a production. You keep working, you keep trying to make it better. And this year is very interesting because we have a new director, Hisa Takakuwa, who had always been the assistant director on it, and mainly the wrangler and director of the children that are in the show. And Hisa's very good, Smith College, incredibly bright woman. So I'm eager to see what she's done with it and what Richard Doyle will do with Scrooge. And Doyle's perspective is interesting to me because I had this theory that if you were an actor and you watched another actor play a part, that you inevitably would be thinking, yep, no, I wouldn't do that, something else. And I asked Richard, I said, you've been half the parts in the play and now you're playing Scrooge. And he said, oh yeah, I have some ideas. So I think it's, he comes sort of like semi-loaded, if you will, into the first rehearsal because he's had so much experience with the play. And, it's going to be interesting to see what he as an artist brings to it that's different and new.
What do you hope the SoCal theater audience gets out of the SCR version of A Christmas Carol?
There are Christmas carols, to be had other than ours. And I think what we've always tried to do is to do one for our community, for Orange County. And part of that has to do with the fact that we're using children who are, enrolled in our conservatory, who audition for the show and are picked because they're good enough to do it. And this is meaningful in the sense that, they go to school, they have schoolmates, and they're classmates and their classmates' parents and other people come to see the show. There are people, this is the 41st year of A Christmas Carol, and I mean, that dates me certainly, but there are people who've seen every one of them. So it is like a church service in a way. It's kind of like a secular service. And I think we do that principally for the community. I mean, the myth or the cynical view, particularly from critics who, oh my God, not another Christmas Carol, this kind of a thing, is that you're just doing it for the money. Well, the money is nice, but no, the reason you do it is the community wants it. They use it to celebrate their Christmas. And so we've been lucky enough to be tasked with coming up with one. And, it's gone very well for us. So, as I say, this is going to be a different kind of a year because of the changes we're making, but, it's still going to be the same story that's, Charles Dickens told. And, Dickens, by the way, if people don't know, performed this himself. Jefferson Mays did A Christmas Carol at the Geffen Theater last year, all by himself, a one-man show, and played all the characters. And Dickens used to do that. And he would come to the United States and make a great deal of money touring, playing all of the Christmas Carol himself. And he needed to do that because Dickens was like Norman Mailer. He had tremendous overhead. He had wives and ex-wives and mistresses and children all over the place. So I forget, I think at one point in the early 70s, Norman Mailer's nut was something like $6 million a year that he had to pay for. And Dickens was in a similar circumstance. He had to make a lot of money. And he did it with A Christmas Carol.
Why should the SoCal theater community go to the SCR version of A Christmas Carol?
First of all, it's quite musical. A friend of mine, Dennis McCarthy, who was in the Motion Picture Academy's Composers Hall of Fame, Dennis was, first of all, I've known Dennis since he was 9 years old and I was 11. And Dennis, as a teenager, played keyboards for the Beach Boys and the Hondells and some other people. If they couldn't get Leon Russell in a session, Dennis got hired. And then he became Glenn Campbell's music director when Glenn started out. And then he wound up, after a series of media assignments, writing as the principal composer for the Star Trek television series. And he worked on that for 18 years. And so Dennis is, a very talented composer. So he took a lot of traditional songs and blended them, made musical pastiches out of them. And there's a terrific score to this play, which Dennis created several years ago that we use. So I think if you come to our carol, that's one thing you're going to get. And the other is, as I say, not everybody uses children, certainly not to the extent that we do. And it's really kind of nice to see, that number of young people up on a stage, as well as a number of years ago now, we went to a complete diverse casting. So we don't, two things we don't do. It's just not all white people by any means. And second, what is the second? It just popped out. Oh yeah, we don't do the dialects. One of the things that we felt made it more accessible to more people who might not be accustomed to going to the theater is to do the show simply in general American dialect. And, some people say, well, they're in London. Yeah. And if you watch an Ibsen play in London, they all have British dialects, even though all those characters are in Norway. So, I mean, if it's good literature, you don't need to do it in dialects. So we think it's more accessible. I know when I go to London and listen to plays, it takes me 5 minutes just to get my ears tuned. And I'm very used to it, to once again listening to British actors. So I would say what's different about ours, aside from the fact that we've worked on it for a long time and I hope refined it, is the music that we bring to it, the children we bring to it, and the accessibility.
What would you tell other playwrights, directors, and actors why they should get involved with South Coast Repertory?
Well, I think as an artist, you're treated very well here. First of all, our salaries have always been competitive with the top of the line in regional theater. We do everything we can to make people comfortable, and we have to, if for no other reason. For hiring LA actors, they've got to make the drive down, and that's not always something they're fond of. Although that's kind of been, it's easier in the pandemic now, but it's still difficult. So, but the main reason I think people were coming down here is for opportunities to play big parts in revivals. If you were an actor who always wanted to play this part and had achieved some degree of celebrity, it was a chance for you to come down and check that box. But mostly, it's been about new plays. And the idea, actors love doing new plays because they get to generate a role. They get to originate it. And it's a big thing to be the first person to do a role. And we did so much new work down here that, people would come down, assuming they were attracted by the role, to sort of plant their flag in this part, because most of the plays got done other places. And so sometimes if it went to New York, as say 3 Days of Rain did, our whole cast went to New York. And so there was that aspect of it. But also there is just this thing among actors in any city of wanting to originate a role. It's something they've aspired to.
Why are theaters like South Coast Repertory so important and need the community's help and support?
Well, we do need the help and support. David Martin and I have talked, and David Ivers now, about the fact of people in the community who were just key, pardon me, in the development of the theater. We couldn't have done it on it. If it had just been us, we'd still be back in the dime store on Newport Boulevard. But it was the community's wish for a theater that, was a full equity theater that put on, high standard work that they didn't have to drive to Los Angeles to see. And so that was a great deal of the help that we got. We also helped in the sense of people in our neighborhood with businesses, be it hotels or restaurants or anything else, had their businesses enhanced by proximity to our theater, because people would come out and have dinner there or whatever and come to the theater. So it's been a symbiosis of a kind that we do contribute to the community beyond the art. Economically, we do. The various studies have been shown that for every dollar that is spent, on a theater ticket, something like $4 or $5 gets spent in the surrounding businesses and parking and restaurants, shopping, whatever. And so we take some pride in that, of being, a generator of business in the community. But then also, there's a thing about live performance. And as somebody who started out writing television, this is the golden age of television. There's so much good stuff on TV being done well. It's well written. Most of the playwrights that we're after all have media jobs. And so you have to ask yourself, as I did, because again, the last 12 years I was in New York, and 3 to 5 nights a week, I would be out seeing plays, most of which really didn't have to be seen, but you don't know that until you go. And it's not like you can walk out because they know who you are. And so you can't just say, I've had enough of this and leave. You have to stay. That kind of experience makes you think, geez, I could sit home in my shorts with a bottle of wine and watch, whatever, Billions or Succession or whatever the show is. Boardwalk Empire was a big favorite of mine because Howard Corder, one of the playwrights that we produce so often here, was writing that show, putting it together. So what makes us something that people ought to, keep coming to? It's the live event. It's the thing that's different every night. It's the community that is created by an audience. The interesting thing to me throughout all my time in theater is that how smart an audience is, how that any audience is so much smarter than the smartest person in the room, that they inform one another. And you don't get that on TV. It's just you and what's coming out of the screen. But when you sit with other people, it's besides being obviously communal, it's just much more educational, because you're sharing responses. Sometimes you don't understand the responses and you have to figure them out later, because it wouldn't have hit you that way unless you'd been there. So I think that's very valuable, and we try to program in ways that deal with subjects and human experience that is, essential and in the forefront of our time. So I hope we continue to do that. And if we do a revival, it's because it's a good time to do that revival. Just from a personal standpoint, again, for not that anybody would know this, but I was here for a long time, from 1967 till 2004. And then I worked at the Old Globe in San Diego, which was a great experience as artistic director there. And then 12 years with Manhattan Theater Club in New York City. And during the late 80s and into the late 90s, I was at Sundance. So I've had all of these incredible opportunities, particularly with the development of new plays. And now I find it was very nice when David Ivers said, will you come back? And I was delighted to return, because this place is, it's like the baseball players, I'll always be a Dodger. Well, I'll always be somebody from South Coast Repertory.
Thank you for listening or watching this podcast episode of Stage Explorations. To learn more about the theater creative and more theater creatives and artists on Stage Explorations, go to www.stageexplorations.com. Once again, that is www.stageexplorations.com. There is no space between stage and explorations. You may find more videos, podcasts, and information about this theater creative and other theater creatives and artists on Stage Explorations YouTube channel. Looking forward to seeing you in the theater. Thank you for listening or watching this podcast episode of Stage Explorations. To learn more about the theater creative and more theater creatives and artists on Stage Explorations, go to www.stageexplorations.com. Once again, that is www.stageexplorations.com. There is no space between stage and explorations. You may find more videos, podcasts, and information about this theater creative and other theater creatives and artists on Stage Explorations YouTube channel. Looking forward to seeing you in the theater.